Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Catherine Miller. Divorce Dialogues brings expert guests to the airwaves to talk through your divorce questions and fill in the gray areas about separating. From thinking about divorce to how to behave during divorce to what to do after, this is Divorce Dialogue. Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Catherine Miller. I'm the founder of the Miller Law Group and a trainer at the Center for Understanding in Conflict, and I am on a mission to change how people divorce and help them divorce with dignity. And I'm really excited today to welcome Dr. Deborah Lukovich to the program. She is a depth psychology coach, an author, and host of the Dose of Depth podcast. With a unique approach rooted in Jungian psychology, Deborah helps individuals harness the power of their unconscious to navigate life's most challenging transitions, which divorce is certainly one of. Welcome, Dr. Deborah Lukovich, to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I think it would be a great place to start if you could just talk a little bit about what depth psychology is. I think everybody thinks that psychology is deep, so how is it different?
Yeah. So depth psychology is the study of the unconscious. Some people may have heard the name Carl Jung. And if they've taken the Myers-Briggs personality inventory, that's actually based on Carl Jung's psychological types theory. And depth psychology is in alignment with really the root of psychology, which is soul and breath. So depth psychology is a more spiritual approach, a psychospiritual approach to understanding yourself more deeply. And once you come into deeper relationship with yourself, capital S, that is the bridge then to the collective, the transcendent, God, whatever you want to call it. So in a nutshell, that's depth psychology. And I would say that even science affirms that up to 90% of who we are is influenced by mysterious unconscious forces. So we like to think we know why we're doing things. We like to think we know why we married who we married and why we're getting divorced. But really, we only know about 20% of that. So there's always a hidden agenda, unconscious agenda, that's sort of our inner self sort of prompting us towards things. And sometimes there will be synchronicities, or sometimes I'll say there's an inciting incident in your story. So there's like an agenda there that is waiting to be discovered.
So how do people do that? How does the unconscious mind influence who we are, what we do, I guess? And when you say there's a hidden agenda, is there a way to unhide it, discover it?
Yeah. Yeah. Discover is a great term, or I like to call my clients are on an Indiana Jones type adventure where discovering what's in your unconscious can be joyful and it can be terrifying at the same time. And yet think about all those Indiana Jones movies. That's a great thing to look at because he had to discover the deeper meaning of symbols. So the unconscious speaks to us in ways that confuse the mind because our mind is defensive in nature. It wants to affirm and confirm what it already knows because that's protective, right? We like to feel grounded. We like to feel safe, but sometimes we're meant to grow. And then the mind is not really helpful. So going to school and pursuing an education, we're doing that of the mind. But the unconscious's agenda for us is more mysterious. So the unconscious speaks to us through dreams. So I do a lot. That's probably the number one way I work with my clients to discover that thing that's waiting to be discovered is through working with their dream images, but also emotions. So when we're feeling anxiety, we have dialogues with our anxiety to find out what anxiety wants from us, or depression or anger. Anger is a great emotion. It's potentially really creative. And in divorce, there can be a lot of anger, but whatever people think they're angry about, it's not that. It's something very old that feels familiar. And so our work is going back to find the root of those patterns of reacting to life where we're either avoiding pain or pursuing pleasure, and those reactions get entrenched. And then when we're being forced to grow or called on to grow or to deal with a challenge or to choose us, sometimes in a divorce situation, it's about getting the courage to choose us instead of acquiescing and over adapting to, a toxic sort of information. So also film images, synchronicity, song lyrics, whatever you notice like, oh, 12 white cars just passed me. What is that? So whatever you notice, it's a way that your unconscious is trying to get you to explore something. And then we explore images. We play around with what those images, a memory is a way that our unconscious speaks to us. So, during a really hard time when it's emotional, a really great question to ask yourself is, what is my earliest memory of feeling this way? And then you can go back and you can kind of disarm the emotion in the moment when you realize that, oh, that's my child self that has sort of taken over. And I feel like a child in this moment, but I'm not a child. I'm an adult. So, hey, honey, I see you there. I know that's how you felt, but I made it. I'm here and I can deal with this situation. So,
Wow, that was a lot.
yeah.
Let's circle back to something you said a few minutes ago about anger, because I think that anger and divorce go hand in hand, right? That
Yeah.
even in the most amicable of divorces
Yeah.
don't happen without some anger. And sometimes by the time people get to me as a lawyer or mediator, they've processed a lot of it. Usually they haven't. But I think what you said was that the anger comes from something that really happened or existed long ago. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is that obviously the circumstance, the words, whatever that is, happened in the here and now,
Mhm.
right? But the reaction that we have to it of anger or fear or hurt or whatever that is rooted in something that happened long ago that made us who we are. Is that what you
Yeah.
mean, or am I missing?
Yeah. So, for example, we can hold two things at once, right? So, we can look at objectively bad behavior. Let's look at bad behavior like there was an affair or something, whatever it was. It's like objectively, like, that's not cool, dude, right? But our reaction, one person might go, that's not cool, dude. I'm not going to accept that. But another person might feel devastated at it. Right. And so that difference in emotion is a clue about whether you're seeing the truth of the situation with a clear head.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because people often say, I can't believe you're so mad about that.
Ooh, that's the worst thing to say to a mad person.
Yeah, like, but it happens a lot. And it's like, I can't believe you're so mad about that. Like, I didn't intend to hurt you that much. And that can kind of explain that kind of disconnect between each person's reaction or like intellectual reaction to exactly what you just said. That's not cool, dude. I don't accept that, to, devastation.
Right. Right. But it is what it is. So a conscious partner would never say that. A conscious person would say, oh, help me. Wow, there's some emotion there. Tell me what's going on for you. Like what do you think that, like, I don't know, let's talk about this, right? So even that response, like, I can't believe that is a projection too. That is another kind of emotion where they're not really seeing clearly. They're not seeing that that person is experiencing pain and suffering, and it might not have to do with them. I love working with couples, actually. I work with them mostly separately. So sometimes my couples were never together, the three of us. We work with each other separately, and it's great because they can discover their own projection, what they're projecting onto the situation, but then also begin to sort of play with what might be being projected onto me, because there is a codependency in the relationship too. So often, one person says something and the other person's emotional, and then their response ends up triggering the other person, and now they're emotional. And so I teach them how to, like, have a code word like banana, so that they go, oh, Deb says 80% of this is something else. So maybe we could take a breath and figure out what's mine, what's yours, and see the situation, see the truth of the situation.
Actually, my husband and I have that. He suggested to me a few years ago. He's like, "Well, when you think I'm criticizing you, could we have like a safe word?" So ours is petunia.
I love it.
sometimes I'm like, get like all this and I'll be like, okay, so Petunia. Like, aren't you criticizing me here? And it kind of makes us laugh and it does kind of defuse. So I can attest that works.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I'm Catherine Miller, and you're listening to Divorce Dialogues, a podcast dedicated to educating people about divorce-related topics so that everyone can divorce with dignity. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts to be sure that you don't miss an episode. And today I'm talking with Dr. Deborah Lukovich about in-depth psychology and divorce. So, Dr. Lukovich, I want to talk to you about what brings you to work with divorcing people and what it is that your own experience brings to the work that you do with your clients.
Oh, well, that second question is a big one. So, because, for some people, the decision to divorce comes easily. Maybe, I don't know. I just assume for some people it's easier than others. For me, it was like the hardest decision in my life for some reason. It was like that eat, pray, love, where she has the moment that she deserves to not want to be married anymore. That's how like afraid I was and how in denial I was about sort of feeling trapped in my relationship. So, but I had to be pushed. I really had to, I was like backed into a corner. And so really odd things happened. For some decisions were made in our relationship that sort of started accelerating alcohol use of my former husband. And what I thought was normal became really dysfunctional. And it was just, when I look back at it now, it was just crazy. It just kept getting worse and worse and nothing was working. And for 18 months, I started going inward. And I asked myself, I never demonized him. In fact, I probably had a little mother complex thing going on. I was way too patient, actually. And I was like, how did I get myself here? How am I in this situation? And what is the answer? And I didn't. So it was really difficult for me. But what was really interesting was the synchronicity that I needed. So Hermes, the trickster, the Greek god known as guide of souls, and he often shows up in midlife during these situations. He is the god of messenger. He's a messenger, communication, and he's a trickster. So there was one moment we were taking a family walk to the main street and it started raining. And I'm like, oh, I love a summer rain. And my former husband was like, oh, I don't like this. And the kids are like, okay, who do I follow? Right. And I had this familiarity of the moment of being responsible for everybody's emotions. And I didn't. This time I was like, whatever, I'm going. Where usually I would like try to advocate and try to get everybody together to do something. So we walked to the pharmacy and I bought a yoga journal magazine, hadn't done that in a while. And in the bathroom later that night, I'm paging through the back and I see this ad for Pacifica Graduate Institute. So this is how I came to depth psychology. And I literally had a visceral response to it. What is that? I don't know what it is, but I have to have it. I've heard of Carl Jung, but I don't know what this stuff is. And that was sort of my journey. I secretively plotted for how was I going to make this happen. And all I knew was that it was going to save my soul. And so I got myself there as my life and my marriage was falling apart. And so when you say, what brings me to this work, it really is like I lived all these concepts in real time. And Carl Jung became my spiritual mentor. And I'm serious. Like I'd be reading about what does it mean to be in the grip of a complex? And that night I would be in the grip of a complex at a bar. And I'd be like, oh my God, I know what it means to be in the grip of a complex. Who am I right now? And so, people come
about revealing a hidden agenda, Deborah.
Oh my gosh. I'm telling it's all in my I have another book coming out. It's almost done. It'll be out in January. And it's my midlife story, and it's called When Sex Meets God. So I didn't know, but through my education, what I discovered, I came of age in the 80s. And what I discovered was that I had these hidden wounds, and it was I needed to reconcile sexuality and spirituality. And I think for a lot of women who did come of age in the 80s, yes, it was a time where we were starting to get into positions of power. And I mean, I witnessed the first woman partner in a major law firm in my hometown. But there was also this backlash at the same time. Like independent women were like destroying families. And so you sort of brush that off and you go on with your life, but you don't realize that you've absorbed a lot. You've absorbed a lot of messages from your parents, from your teachers, from society. And so as much as you think you're in charge of your life, which I did, there's a lot of other things that are influencing it. So yeah. So people come to me in different phases. One of my very first clients had just gone through her divorce and she was devastated. She really hadn't ever had her own thoughts about things. And so her first post-divorce relationship was fascinating because it was with somebody she had been friends with. So I love working with people who are after divorce. Now, what do they need to look for? Did they actually explore enough to not repeat some patterns? And as much as people think that person that they fell in love with is everything the other person wasn't, no, it'll be interesting. The same, suddenly you'll be like, oh, this feels familiar, but no, he's so different, right? But you can't help it, until you identify the patterns, you just sort of continue to repeat them. So when my clients do work with me, they become more aware and then they can deal with the truth of the situation and then be honest with their partner about what it is. And other people come to me not knowing what to do in their relationship. And those are really fascinating. And I'll say, I don't know what the right answer is, but we'll discover it. The first thing to do is really explore your unconscious so you can see the truth of the situation. And then one day you'll know which way to go. But that confusion point, for me, that was torture, not knowing the right thing to do. Once I knew the right thing to do, I could do it. I could do anything hard, but not knowing the right thing to do. So yeah, my personal experience very much is connected to my passion for working with people.
It sounds like, apart from your own personal experience, that the work that you do is really to help people identify what's going on for themselves so that, that they don't just keep repeating the same patterns that they had from childhood or adolescence or something like that. I mean, and that we've had some other guests on the show that talked about how to make sure that you don't just sort of get out of the frying pan into the fire, so to speak, with regard to another post-divorce relationship. Do you think that it's true, this sort of old adage that you end up marrying one of your parents? I mean, obviously not literally.
I mean, yeah, why wouldn't you? Like your early caregivers are your example of relationship. And so we know in therapy that familiarity is what we always want to maintain, even if it's toxic, right? So we could have a lovely childhood, but what we learned, like one of the interesting during my unraveling, I read a book by Iyanla Van Zandt, and it was a lot of reflection questions. And one of them that really helped me was, what did you learn about love as a child? And I think for this topic of divorce, I think that's a really useful question for anyone going through a divorce. And that's how you can get sort of at the mother wound and the father wound is, what did I learn about love? And I learned that love was conditional upon my perfect behavior. So I wasn't physically abused or anything, but I also realized that my mother gave me two messages. Her verbal message was, you can do anything. She was like, three daughters, you can do anything. Go out there and do it. But then her behavior was, and the way she parented me was that I wasn't quite good enough. Now, why wasn't I quite good enough? Well, I came to understand that she needed me to prove that she was a better mother than her abusive mother. Right? So I went off escaping my mother. Now, how did I end up kind of being a little like my mother? Right? So we think we're doing, and part of the problem is when we know what we don't want to be, but we don't have a vision for what we want to be because we didn't have a role model for that, we just kind of end up, it's so complicated. Like you just one day realize that, oh, this is why I'm a perfectionist. And what I discovered about how my mother showed up in my marriage was because I didn't want to be with her, I thought she was kind of mean. And she was mean to my father, and then she got divorced, and she was married to my stepfather for 38 years, but she was mean to him too, is I showed up as over accommodating. So sometimes you can show up not as the parent, but as a reaction, and you overcompensate the other way. So I was over adaptive because I didn't want to be a mean wife. I mean, people say, Deb, you're so patient and you're so like, you just allow your husband to do anything. And I was like, well, he lets me do what I want to. But like over time, that wasn't equal anymore. And so I over adapted to him. So that's just an example of how complicated it is. So yes, in a way you pull something into, you show up in your relationship as a reaction to your parents and how they parented you.
Wow, that's a lot. I want to just remind people that I'm Catherine Miller, and you're listening to Divorce Dialogues. Divorce Dialogues has been educating people about divorce and relationship issues for over 10 years. Subscribe to the podcast, and don't forget to check out our previous episodes on the podcast website, divorcedialogues.com. And I'm talking today with Dr. Deborah Lukovich about depth psychology and divorce and how complicated things can be when your own hidden agenda impacts a relationship that you're in. And Dr. Lukovich, if people want to learn more about your podcast, about you, your book, or anything like that, how can they do that?
If they go to deborahlukovich.com, they'll find everything. So it's DeborahLukov as in Victor, ICH.com. And up at the top are all my little icons. So you can get to my podcast, you can get to my blog. I love writing. I actually have a really interesting blog post about a first post-divorce relationship. It's called it's about ferrets, actually. I was working a dream with my client about ferrets, and we ended up coming upon this major insight about her and her first post-divorce relationship. So I wrote a blog post about it. So yeah, everything is there, including a link to my book. So my book is Your Soul is Talking, Are You Listening? And in that book, I think this is great for people who are going through a divorce. You learn how your unconscious, all the different ways your unconscious speaks to you. And I share little stories from my own life, but like particularly topics about complexes. So complexes are your patterns of thinking and behaving and reacting and responding. And then also projection, because it's just such a juicy topic. Like, going back and exploring, well, why were we attracted to each other? And typically what we really admire in the other person is our unconscious's way of saying, I want you to be a little more like that. But what happens is instead of people being a little bit more like each other, they become more entrenched in their roles. And then eventually there's resentment because there wasn't that kind of growth. And also, I just wanted to say something about it sounds like, it's so mature to not have that it wasn't an affair and I'm going inward and all of that. But there is a place for irrational love affairs. So if you've done enough inner work, this happened to me. So I knew I was going to be getting divorced, and I did some online dating for 6 months. And it was like a curriculum for me to come into better relationship with my body and my sexuality. And then I was like, okay, I've had enough. I have to get into this PhD program now. I was 2 years in, and I was at the beach, and I was like, oh my gosh, is he looking at me? There was this man, and I was just like, what is happening to me? And I ended up in the most irrational, ironic love affair with a man 17 years younger than me. This is a thing for women too, who are 50. There is this thing that happens to you. And so you don't want to judge yourself. And because I was aware that something deeper was happening, but I didn't know what, I allowed myself to get swept up. And that relationship is crazy. It's in the book. It is because of that relationship that I was able to reconcile my wounds of sexuality and spirituality. So there's no right answers, right? It's just that what is the lesson I'm supposed to be learning? So I don't want people to get the idea that it's wrong. And even if what pulled you out of your marriage was falling in love with someone else, the way to approach it would be, this feels really good right now, but I know there's also something deeper going on that doesn't even have to do with this relationship. So the fact that it may or may not be permanent doesn't matter. And that's where people sort of go wrong, is they jump into another relationship thinking this is another white knight, this is forever, when it might just be a transition relationship. And so changing your relationship with relationship and what that means, and my 3-piece framework, that there's a purpose to why you're attracted to someone, and part of it most of it you don't know. And then we learn and we grow through projection onto each other. That's the way we relate. So understanding and exploring that, and then not being tied to the relationship being permanent, because it's the emotional state that you're going after, not it lasting forever. And that, that's like shaking up conventional, thinking about relationships.
Deborah, I was going to ask you about divorce and the loss of identity and purpose, and how often we form ourselves, particularly in a long-term marriage, in relation to the other person. I was going to say in reaction to the other person, but I think it's not always in reaction. Sometimes it's in relation, projection too.
Yeah.
But I'm really also intrigued by the sexuality and spirituality, and I think that the listeners are probably really intrigued. You've said that a lot during the podcast so far. So talk a little bit about that. What is that? What do you mean about that? And how do you see that evolution?
Oh, sexuality is typically understood only literally. And we misunderstand sexual energy. We misunderstand arousal and attraction most of the time. So if you are aroused to or attracted to someone that is not your partner, like, okay, the question would be like, what does that person represent for me? And so we really explore the deeper meaning of sexuality. And sexuality is also creative intelligence. So not only from a literal aspect, we are attracted to each other and we have a baby and we create a baby, but no, like one of the ways I feel aroused is discussing intellectual ideas about social justice, for example. Like I literally get aroused. And the first time this happened to me, I was with a male colleague. I have more male friends than female friends for some reason. And we're chatting about something that is like really, I'm passionate about it. And all of a sudden I felt aroused. Like I literally between my legs, I was like, what is going on? And I'm having a conversation with myself, like, am I attracted to him? And I wasn't, like literally physically, I wasn't attracted to him. And then I imagined myself kissing him and I'm like, no, I'm just not. But why am I so aroused right now? So I think we need to break down all the conventional thinking about like, what is sexual energy? And we would probably get in less trouble if we sat back and thought, okay, what is it that's exactly arousing for me in this situation? Is it a conversation? Is it the physique of this person? And what is it saying about me? What is it mirroring back to me? And it's not necessarily that I should go have sex with that person. It might be like maybe that is the right thing to do, right? And then that's your inciting incident for whatever is going to happen next in your life. But in more cases than not, it's trying to communicate something else to you that has to do with actually your passion. And then, I could talk about sexuality in marriage. What happens often when we, instead of growing towards each other, if we just get entrenched in our roles, and this is where the mother and the father and the parents can show up. So I'll use an extreme example, a woman who's like, oh, he's going to take care of me. Right. And a man who's like, oh, she's going to hold my domestic side. And so when we're not balanced and we just have the other person, the woman has the husband carry the financial independence burden that she's not taking on for herself, and he has her hold all the emotional domestic sort of energy. What happens is over time, there is resentment. And then soon one person is like, the man might begin to feel like the father. And does he want to have sex with his daughter? No. Right. But you can, or the woman might feel, she might feel that the husband is treating her like a father because she has made him responsible for all the finances. And so she doesn't want to have a sex with her father. So like sexuality within a marriage, I love that topic as well, because it's not usually what people think it is. And it's, you know what I mean? So I mean, I could talk a lot about sexuality, but
yeah, I think that, so a lot of times it's really interesting because a lot of times people think that one of the big reasons for the end of marriage is sex or lack of sex or incompatibility in the bedroom or wherever sex happens. And I think you're talking about some of the things that happen in the relationship that cause that to be a problem. Because, my theory, I'm curious what you think about this, is that most relationships break down because of bad communication. And it shows up in the bedroom, in the bank account, or the checkbook, or wherever it is. It shows up in that way because there's a vulnerability in the relationship in that place where the poor communication is really showing itself. And so I don't think that what you just said dissuades me from my theory.
No, I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. Like communication isn't even a good enough word. It's more like honesty and vulnerability, because communication is like, I tried all the communication techniques with my former husband. I became an expert, and I mean, I now teach how to do start with heart. I actually teach couples how to use a tool to have conversations with each other, and it's like a written tool, and it works like magic. So it's not like communication, it's more the vulnerability and
The
the
willingness to put it out there, right? Like the
yeah.
willingness to, yeah.
But also, we aren't taught how to do it. So we aren't taught how to even separate, like, okay, like that's why I like my tool. You start by, well, here's what I've observed. It's data points. I've observed that when you say this, I end up feeling this way. Or I've observed that I feel this way in a certain situation when you say this. People don't usually say it that way. They say, you did this to me. You make me feel this way. Well, nobody makes you feel. But your emotions, you can't control your emotions. They're there, but you can have some control over your feelings and thoughts about them, and you can bring about another emotional state. But the emotion that gets triggered, it's there. So then, if you say, well, here is, I'm noticing, I'm connecting dots that when we're in this situation, like I notice a certain passive aggressiveness on the back to my former husband in a certain kind of conversation with him. I only noticed that because I had Hermes help me out at work. I had somebody who worked for me that was so passive aggressive, and I didn't know what it was, that she gave me a cold sore. Like, I didn't know how to deal with it. It was just, I just didn't know, because for my mother, I was always pleasing her, right? And so here's someone worked for me, yet she was manipulating me. And so in that moment, I was like, oh, this is what's going on in my communication, that when I say, John, I'm feeling stressed right now. I have a business and I'm a Girl Scout coach. And I would just say, I am a Girl Scout troop leader. Can we do something? I wouldn't even blame him for anything. And his response would be, well, I'm helping. Helping is like my curse word. I'm helping. And so then what that ended up doing on me is I went, oh, I didn't say you weren't helping. And soon I was trying to make him feel better about how much he was doing, and it took away from my problem. So I didn't know how to communicate that. We're just not taught. And so the reason we're not honest is because in our unconscious, we have 60,000 thoughts a day, 200 emotions. Most of them aren't conscious, right? So in our unconscious, when we are wanting to be honest, all of a sudden our unconscious is calculating all these pros and cons and all the potential things that might happen if we're honest. Like, I'm going to destroy the relationship. We're not even, they're just all balled into one. And that's what stops us from being honest. So it's too easy to say, you just need to communicate. Like, there is a reason that we don't feel safe communicating, but we really don't know what it is. So anyway, this tool gets at that, and it's called Start with Heart, because it implies you care about each other. And it just teaches you how to put emotion in the right place. So I see, I think, I feel, I want for me, I want for you, I want for us. So let's try this. I mean, it's a beautiful tool.
Dr. Deborah Lukovich, we've covered so much territory, and there's so much more, but we're out of time. Thank you so much for being my guest on Divorce Dialogues. It's been really great.
Oh, I really enjoyed it.